Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video and leaving meaningful comments. Wishing everyone good health and happiness. Early in the morning, when the mist still lingered on the treetops, I stepped out of the house with a sharp knife in hand. Before me stretched a lush green bamboo forest, with tall, straight bamboo stalks reaching skyward as if waiting to be harvested. I carefully selected the suitable stalks and cut them with precise, deliberate strokes. The sound of the knife striking the bamboo echoed in the serene morning air, blending with the cheerful chirping of birds to create a peaceful yet vibrant scene. After cutting down the necessary bamboo stalks, I sat down on an open patch of ground and began splitting them into strips. My movements were steady and skillful, the blade gliding lightly over the bamboo to produce thin, even, and sharp strips. These strips would later be used to bundle cassava after I ventured deeper into the forest for harvesting. Though simple, this task required patience and meticulousness, as each strip needed to be durable enough for its intended use. Not far from where I was working, James and his manager drove into the forest. They were there to visit workers harvesting timber and inspect the quality of the wood being extracted. James always prioritized workplace safety and the well-being of his workers, reminding them to be cautious while working. His words of advice echoed through the forest as encouragement for those laboring tirelessly. Once I finished splitting the bamboo strips, I packed up my tools and made my way deeper into the cassava field. Rows of cassava plants stretched out before me, their large roots hidden beneath soft soil. Carefully, I used my hands to pull up each cassava root, ensuring they remained intact and undamaged. My hands and clothes became covered in dirt, but my heart was filled with joy at seeing such a plentiful harvest of beautiful roots. After gathering all the cassava, I used the freshly split bamboo strips to bundle them together securely. This task also required precision to ensure that the bundles were sturdy and easy to transport. The heavy bundles of cassava were the fruits of my labor that morning. Looking at them brought me a quiet sense of satisfaction as I thought about selling them at the market to earn some extra money for daily expenses. As sunlight began filtering through the tree branches, illuminating the forest, I stood up, wiped sweat from my forehead, and prepared to carry the bundles out of the woods. Though tiring, this work gave me a sense of peace amidst nature's vast beauty. That morning was a familiar part of my daily life, simple yet profoundly meaningful. Mr. Pow's family arrived at my uncle's house with a serious and pressuring demeanor. They sat down and spoke directly with my uncle, demanding that I return to be Mr. Pow's wife. Their words were not merely a request but carried a clear threat. They declared that if I did not return, they would transfer the debt to my uncle, forcing him to take responsibility on my behalf. Faced with such intimidation, my uncle had no choice but to agree to search for me and bring me back. At that moment, I was at the market, sitting beside the bundles of cassava I had just harvested. The pristine white cassava bundles were neatly arranged, drawing the attention of passers-by. I was focused on selling my goods, completely unaware of the significant events unfolding at my uncle's house. Just then, James drove past the market. From afar, he saw me sitting there, diligently selling cassava with a tired yet determined look after a day of hard work. James decided to approach me discreetly. He borrowed a jacket from someone nearby to cover his face and walked over to where I was. Without saying much, he bought all the cassava I had displayed for sale. His action surprised me but also brought great joy as I managed to sell all my goods in such a short time. I felt relieved and happy to have completed my morning's work. However, a lingering curiosity remained about the mysterious buyer. I packed up my belongings and prepared to head home, unaware that my uncle was out looking for me under Mr. Pow's family's demands. These unfolding events were like an undercurrent waiting to disrupt the calmness of my life. As I stepped out of the market, the sunlight grew brighter and stronger. Walking along the familiar path home, I felt hopeful about having had a productive day of labor. Yet somewhere in my mind lingered the image of the mysterious man who had bought all my cassava, a strange yet kind gesture. Little did I know that behind those small moments of joy lay a series of complex events awaiting me ahead. After selling all the cassava at the market, I felt relieved and happy. The heavy bundles of cassava, the fruits of my morning's labor, had been sold completely. I packed up my belongings and prepared to head home with a cheerful heart. However, as I stepped onto the familiar path leading back home, I unexpectedly encountered my uncle, who was searching for me. He stood there, looking tired and worried, his eyes filled with seriousness. He told me I had to return home immediately to meet Mr. Pau's family. I was shocked and confused by my uncle's words. I tried to ask for an explanation, but he didn't say much, only mentioning that Mr. Pau's family had come and pressured him into bringing me back. I pleaded with him, telling him I didn't want to return to that place, but my pleas were ignored. Although my uncle cared for me, he couldn't resist the overwhelming pressure from Mr. Pau's family. On the way to Mr. Pau's house, my heart was heavy with thoughts. I recalled the difficult days I had spent living there and felt terrified at the prospect of returning. Yet, under my uncle's coercion, I had no choice but to comply. When we arrived, Mr. Pau's family was already waiting in the yard with expressions of joy. They welcomed me as if they had achieved something they had long desired. Mr. Pau's family quickly apologized for wrongly accusing me about the house papers in the past. They promised to treat me better to make up for their previous mistakes. My mother-in-law went out to the garden to catch a chicken and prepared a lavish dinner as if to celebrate my return. During the meal, everyone chatted cheerfully, but my heart remained cold and empty. After dinner, Mr. Pau tried to pull me into bed with him, but I firmly refused. I felt distant and couldn't accept returning to my old life as easily as they expected. My father-in-law noticed the tension and advised Mr. Pau to let things happen naturally. He brought a mat down to the kitchen for me to sleep on. I sat by the glowing fire in the small kitchen of Mr. Pau's house, tears streaming down my weary and helpless face. The flickering flames danced on the burning wood, reflecting the turmoil in my heart at that moment. Curling up by the fire, I tried to find some warmth amidst the cold thoughts about my life. Meanwhile, James arrived at the house where I used to stay but found no sign of me there. He waited anxiously until late into the night, hoping to see me and understand what was happening in my life. My absence deepened his worry as thoughts of something serious affecting me grew stronger in his mind. That night by the glowing fire in Mr. Pau's small kitchen felt like one of the longest nights of my life, a night filled with tears and contemplation about an uncertain future ahead. The small flame beside me was the only source of light that reminded me I still existed in this vast world, a world full of pressures and constraints from which I couldn't escape. I thought back to peaceful days when I lived freely without being bound by anyone or anything. But now everything had changed. Decisions about my life no longer seemed mine but were controlled by others. I felt like a bird trapped in a cage, yearning to fly far away but held back by invisible chains. In that small kitchen, while the fire continued burning brightly, my heart grew colder than ever before. Looking around at this familiar house that now felt foreign to me, every corner brought back painful memories of living here before. My father-in-law added more wood to keep the fire burning longer. He looked at me with sympathetic yet helpless eyes. As night deepened further, the sound of insects outside blended into a melancholic symphony that matched my mood perfectly at that moment. I curled up on the mat near the fire my father-in-law had brought down for me, trying to find some warmth amidst the cold night air and overwhelming loneliness enveloping my soul. Meanwhile, James hadn't stopped worrying about my safety. He left my old house with a heavy heart after failing to find any trace of me there. He knew something serious was happening in my life, an unease growing steadily within him throughout that long night. That night was one of the longest nights in my life, a night full of tears and reflections on a future shrouded in uncertainty. The light from the small fire beside me was all that kept reminding me that I still existed amidst a world filled with pressures and bindings from which I couldn't break free. Meanwhile, James arrived at the house where I used to stay, but all that remained was an empty, silent space. The door was slightly ajar, and the familiar traces seemed to have faded with time. He stepped into the yard, his eyes scanning the surroundings, hoping to find some clue about me. But there was nothing, no message, no sign that I was still there. A sense of unease rose within him as he stood there waiting, letting time slip by. The sky gradually darkened, and the cold night wind blew through, intensifying the chill. He pulled out his phone, intending to call me, but hesitated. An unnamed doubt made him clench his hand tightly, his eyes filled with worry. Finally, as night enveloped everything, James had no choice but to leave. His figure disappeared into the dark alley, carrying a heavy heart and countless unanswered questions.